Alright, so we're going to continue talking about our connective tissue and do a little bit of actual work with that. So just quick review, we just did it, so this should be relatively easy review. So what is connective tissue?
Connects the tendons, so ligaments to, and other things to bones and
Connects everything.
connects it.
Connects everything. Creates and sustains the structural matrix for life. Right? Big, broad thing. What is dense connective tissue?
Bones and
Cartilage.
Yeah. What is fluid connective tissue?
blood, lymph, and matrix.
Blood.
Yes, the blood, the lymph, and the extracellular matrix or ground substance. What is the fascial system? What tissues are part of it?
Ligaments and the fascia. Tendons.
Yep, tendons, ligaments, fascia. What are the other three fascias?
Superficial,
Yep,
perificial,
perifascia.
Fascial.
Yeah,
Deep.
and deep. Yeah. And so what is the fascial system? So we've named the tissues that are part of it.
It's a system with sheathing and envelopes that can go around muscle and connective tissue to either help it slide, to lubricate it, to
Protect it.
All of the things. Provide a continuum of support that permeates the body. It does all the things. How might connective tissue and the fascial system in particular impact your practice or your students' practice?
they're different, just like the bone structure is, so somebody may have a different ability with that structure.
Yeah.
And they also may have an injury to that structure.
Yes. So tendinous or ligamentous injury would impact practice greatly. Degree of tone in the connective tissue can impact a range of motion. So students that have a more lax tone, maybe more hypermobile, but students have a denser tone of their connective tissue are going to be stiffer and have a harder time moving in and out of poses as well. All right, with the person beside you, you're going to describe and identify on your partner, so you're going to describe it to one another, and identify on your partner somewhere where there's superficial fascia. So tell your partner what superficial fascia is.
Would be on your hand, for example.
Absolutely.
Is that the one you can slide?
Well, you can see it slide.
Yeah,
But that's, so this, yeah, that's,
or you can grab a bit,
yeah.
but not much.
No,
Yeah.
there's not a lot.
Yeah.
So where do you have more?
Your
across
hands,
cushion.
your top of your feet,
Go for the big
Where do you
bang.
have more than say this?
your thighs.
Even here,
Yeah.
this to this,
Yeah.
I can get a lot more, right? So that's that superficial one, the one that we can pick up and pull off our skin. It's harder to grab it on your thigh. I gotta grab a big chunk up there, right? So then the perifascia, which I think is kind of more where you were sliding to there, Margaret, quite literally sliding,
Yeah,
Well,
the
that's
slide,
the
because it helps the muscles slide.
right? Okay, so superficial is the one we can pick up off our skin. Perifascia is the one that allows our superficial to slide over our deep. Deep fascia, that one we can't really palpate, right? It's much deeper underneath all of those layers.
When you see like a picture of like somebody's face without the skin and like you see all that yellow bubbly stuff on the cheeks, is that what that is?
Quite likely. It could be other structures and stuff in there as well, but quite likely you're seeing the fascia. So the one I liken it to is, and a lot of people are like, I'm never eating chicken again. But if you get a chicken breast, right, with the white stuff, if it hasn't been really well butchered, that's fascia. That's connective tissue that's on there.
Sometimes you have to remove it when you're cooking ribs. too.
Yeah.
It's on the ribs.
The
Right.
silver.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't cut through it,
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
It's
tough
pretty
to eat.
tough stuff. Tendon. Where can we palpate a tendon on our body?
Knee.
The Achilles one, yeah.
Oh.
Or the
okay.
IT.
Actually, that would be the deep fascia. So yes, you actually can palpate some of your deep fascia. So your IT band is actually deep fascia. So I forgot about that one, but yes, that one's not a tendon, so it is deep
Okay.
fascia. The Achilles tendon is definitely one you can palpate. The back of your hands, right? You can also see those ones. How about ligaments? These ones we definitely can't palpate. But what are they?
They're bone on bone
Yeah.
and they protect.
They provide movement, but also limit the movement, right? It allows movement in a specific direction, as an example. All right. Now, you're gonna come over to your mats.
We need our books.
May as well bring them just in case. We will be doing some stuff in them, but we might come back to the table for that one. See?
Are you turning the camera?
Yeah. I was just thinking that, but thank you for reminding me. There we go. So you're gonna be with a partner, and you're gonna be standing, actually, so don't get too cozy. I know, we just had lunch, so we want to sit down and chill out, right? We're not doing anything too
We want
crazy.
to do a lay down meditation.
All right, so pick a partner. You can just go with the person you're next to is probably fine. And one of you is going to stand in Tadasana. Either one, it doesn't matter. You're both going to do it. So Tadasana, palms forward, feet hip distance. Think about all your universal paired actions. We're not going to cue them all, but think about a nice active Tadasana. The other partner is going to start by seeing the whole person. You're observing. So you might actually walk slowly around them to take in their Tadasana and notice anything. Now once you've done a full circle, come to one side of them, either side. Ask your student to fully straighten their legs.
Fully straighten your legs, please.
From the side, notice the relationship of their ankles, knees, and hips. So is everything stacked? So with fully straightened legs from the side, we would want to see this from the side. So we're looking to see if everything is stacked. Do they have the ability to hyperextend their knees? Ooh, that's a big pop.
Good crap. That feels like that to me, I don't know if it is.
Okay. So switch. So just do a observation of them in Tadasana. Do a full circle around them. And then once you've gone all the way around, pause on one side. And ask your partner to fully extend their knees.
Okay, I'm fully extended.
And then check the relationship of the ankles, knees, and hips. Are they stacked? Do they have the ability to hyperextend their knees?
Don't think so, but I think your styles. Can you actually try to hyperextend? Really?
Doing it as much as I can.
That's not done. And you have one knee that doesn't do as much, right?
Yeah.
Let's see, try to see if it's any different.
Ever so slightly. You know,
Yeah.
when I do
Yeah.
Okay. So,
There you go, then you're going, that looks a bit more. Yeah.
I only saw one knee joint in this room, quite literally one knee joint in this room that can hyperextend.
So somebody's got one that can hyperextend.
One, just one, just one.
This one?
Yep.
I knew you were gonna say that,
So turn to the side.
because I could feel it myself, just thinking about it.
And it's not a bad hyperextension,
Oh,
but
see,
see
yeah,
how
that
this
is it.
actually pops back,
Yeah.
but it doesn't do that on this side.
Wow, that's the one I injured.
I was just gonna ask.
That's the one I injured.
Less stability, right? So like I said, that is one joint I cannot hyperextend on
And
my
I've
body.
never felt it before, but was talking about it, as soon as I went into it, I felt it.
Yeah.
That's so weird.
You generally, so we literally ask you to straighten your legs. We usually cue soft knees,
Yes.
right? So then you wouldn't notice it, right? Because you're listening to that cue, so that's good.
Mhm.
All right, so we're going to do a little observation with our partner about if we're hypermobile.
No, I'll tell you right now.
It is not super common. It is highly undiagnosed, but it is not super common. But yes, they're probably going to need to be able to see more pieces of your body. So you're going to be working with your partner again. First thing you're going to ask people to do is extend their arms out to the side. So one partner can go first. at shoulder height and extend your arms as much as possible. And then do a walk around them and see, is their elbow able to hyperextend? Oh, and you do have this on your book on page 147, so you may want to write down in your own book about yourself if anybody observes that you are. Now, just for fun, flip your palms to the sky and try to fully extend, because that's an easier way to see it. We often in yoga have our palms facing down, but it's actually much easier to see it in palms flipped up. So, if you don't have your book with you, grab it and turn to page 147. Okay, so the one who was just observed, you can note down, do your elbows hyperextend, yes or no?
127.
147.
So my knee does, my right knee.
We're gonna
Pretty
actually
sure-
check knees
pretty
next.
sure not.
Can we turn this off just for a bit?
If I turn it off, it will get crazy.
Hot in here? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just cold standing here, but.
So
Notice-
you can
notice-
slide back over there. It is blowing right there, so you don't have to be on
Yeah.
your mat for this exercise. So if you move over towards the wall, because right there it's still going to be blowing directly on you. Yeah. Okay, so do the other person with the elbows.
So,
So start with palms down. Just fully extend it to the
are
side.
you likely to be more than one joint?
Just because she has it in one joint doesn't mean, so she told us she had an injury, right? So
Mhm.
that's why she has it in that one joint, not because she's hypermobile.
Oh,
Really extend out as much as you can.
How did you feel like I did that knee?
Mm.
So she said to tighten it.
I
I
think
felt
we're
the
not talking
difference.
now.
You did?
Yeah, if you rotate and then extend
Is it
the palms down.
No, well, I guess you have to go slide in here.
Okay, so
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not saying
Feel it.
push past that range of motion.
No.
No?
so
I don't think.
here's what you're looking for, friends.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
wow.
yeah,
There you
okay.
go.
So you're going down, I thought because
She
she's
goes
going
way back.
a bit.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Right, it's not necessarily a good thing, but that's what you're looking for. So if it doesn't look like that, you're probably fine, because mine are actually mild in comparison to a lot of hypermobile people.
Now, can you do it one more time? Is this one more hypermobile than this one?
One is more than the other, I don't really know which one is. So, and you can even see it in me when I'm here. So you can only see that from the side usually, because from the front, you can't see it very well, but from the side, you
Oh,
can see it.
gosh. You can actually
Right.
see
You
it
can
from
actually
the
see the
back
angle
of the
of it going
elbows.
this way.
Yeah, because my hands are in line with my shoulders, but my elbows are in front of my shoulders.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what you're looking
Well,
for
that's-
for the elbows. Where else will you see that?
Thumbs?
In what pose?
Oh. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I have to be very mindful not to do that. Okay, so next one. Knees. So first partner, just like we did in Tadasana, stand straight and try to fully extend your knees. Try to actually lock them out. And then just take a quick look. We've kind of already checked this one, so it'll take a long time here. Are they able to naturally extend beyond straight? No. I'd say no. So you can write that down, a no in your book. What's that?
This is why I think,
Check the other partner. I think
Do
I
we
get.
already know?
We already know how this one.
Yeah.
yeah, when you were doing it, it's, push back past. That's good.
See,
Yeah.
or, no, your knees aren't.
They aren't.
Yeah.
That's the only joint I can't hyperextend.
That's interesting.
It's partially because of muscle tone. I am a mesomorph. I carry a ton of muscle in my legs. I've got like tree trunk legs. Just always been, even when I was really slight, really underweight, my legs were like ginormous because I carry a lot of muscle. So the joint itself might actually be hyperextending, but you can't see it because I have big hamstrings and big calves. So it doesn't look like they're going backwards at all. When I was checked at the clinic, they actually told me they were hyperextending slightly.
Okay.
They just don't look like it.
Hmm.
Okay, thumb is the next one. So you're gonna flex your wrist like this, and then try to pull your thumb into your,
I used
I
to be
can
able
actually
to.
see your knee kind of hyperextending.
yeah, they told me it is, it doesn't
Yeah, when I was
look
I think
like
it's
it a lot,
arthritis
like,
when
you
I
will
was a
see
kid.
some people really
Actually, you know,
going
we used to
back.
do that in
Yeah.
school all the time,
So
you
it's
know,
tap flex like
and I
this,
could.
and then pulling it in.
But I can't
This?
now.
Yeah, and try to get it to touch.
Yeah.
Without pain, that's the other cue that I did not give you. Right, and check both hands.
Can that change as you get older? 'Cause
Yes.
In school, we used to do that, right? You
Yes.
bend your
Oh,
thumb
yeah.
back. I can't do it now.
Not to the
I
side.
mean, it's like pretty
Backwards
close.
like this, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but someone who's hypermobile, it will literally just go boop and touch. So, I used to be able to do it on both sides as well. This side is not now, it would go if I forced it, but I won't do it. This side, it's still fairly easy. So, those are just 3 of the ones. So we also have what's called a Baton score for hypermobility, and it tests other areas as well. That's what the clinic would use to actually diagnose you with hypermobility on a scale of 9. So there's 9 areas that check. You would have to have 4 of those things at a minimum to be considered hypermobile. So I would pretty confidently say nobody in here is hypermobile other than me. You get a point for each thing. So they check your thumb on both hands, they check both knees, they check both elbows. I'm trying to remember what the other ones are. One of the other ones is the pinky finger, and if it goes back past 90 degrees when your hand is flat. Right, so that one I actually have them both still. Yeah, just the doesn't bother me at all. But that's why sometimes when I go to like press up off the ground, my thumb will give or what have, because those joints are hypermobile, so the connective tissue in there is not holding the joint as it needs to. So let's see what your plank pose looks like. So one partner. And you're gonna observe them in plank. You can go from your toes or your knees, doesn't matter which, but full hands please for this one. And just take a quick walk around, observe, check out their joints. Are we hyperextending anything? Are we too bent in anything?
Are we correcting their posture or just
Yep.
noting it?
Yep, you can give them correction.
Your wrists are behind your shoulders.
I actually like the way your shoulder blades
Yeah.
were, but
Yeah.
Margaret, could you straighten your arms?
Yeah, I'm always very bendy in the arms. I don't know if that's
It could be
natural or
tight.
what I've been
Bend
told
elbows.
to do. Some of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could
I
be
don't
tight.
believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are we trying to figure out with Stacy?
Yeah.
You can come down, ladies. What were we looking for, trying to figure out?
Oh, I lined her wrists under her shoulders, and then I was looking at the question, experience of a micro bend in my elbows.
Yes, so most students are gonna naturally have the micro bend in their elbows. It's people that have elbows like me that you're gonna have to watch for otherwise. So I have heard this cue from instructors, and it always makes me cringe because if I did this cue, I would be so hyperextended, I'd be in pain. So I have heard people say, bring the eye of your elbow forward.
Yeah, I've heard that one, yeah.
That is a terrible cue for anybody that's hypermobile. For somebody who is, so Margaret, come down into your plank. Now try to bring the eye of your elbow forward. So that looks better for Margaret. How does it feel though?
Not as natural. I don't know if it gives me better workout. I don't
It
know.
gave you more stability
Yeah.
because it brought you into that stacked position. So it could be a good cue for people, but somebody who is using their joint because they're not stable enough, you will see them lock that joint out, and if you ask them to micro bend their elbow, they're gonna be like, oh my god, it's so hard now, because they're so used to being in the joint. So it will make their plank that much harder. I've been working for years on stabilizing my joint, so I naturally don't hyperextend my elbows when I'm in a plank. I do it lots of other places when I'm not thinking about it. but because I've trained my body to not do that, but if you see somebody that's hypermobile that maybe isn't aware of that, that's where you're gonna see it in a plank, is you're gonna see those elbows popping, and they will either be collapsing in towards one another. It doesn't hurt, I promise, I don't put weight on it. Or they will pop this way. So that's bigger for me. If I do that, that's like, nope, not a good idea.
What's a gentle correction to bring them more into,
Bend your elbows.
just bend your elbow? Okay.
Yeah, soften your elbows.
If they're hypermobile.
But not too much.
So I would only give that to somebody who I'm seeing them lock those elbows
Yeah.
out. Melanie, you can watch her elbows for that. She does it all the time if she does anything from her hands.
Okay.
Yeah.
She locks her elbows?
Yep.
Okay.
And she is probably somewhat hypermobile. She has a lot of joints like that, so she lacks stability in a lot of the movements. So those are a lot of the corrections that I tend to give her.
Okay.
But if you see somebody that is locked through the elbows, even if they're not hypermobile, we don't want them locked through the elbows because we don't want the joint doing the work. Soften a little bit. You should feel more work happening in the muscles. Yes? Yes. Good. Perfect. Do that. Okay? So even if somebody is not, so other partner can try the plank as well.
Okay. Oh, really?
Even if somebody's not hypermobile, they may still have a tendency to lock the joint.
Now, is it supposed to be locked?
Doesn't look like
No,
it's locked.
your
It's
joint
like
shouldn't be
you're
locked.
engaging through the
It
muscle.
looks pretty locked, like, it looks pretty, yeah, to me it did.
No,
No?
I think it was okay. Yep.
Okay.
And just for fun, try the eye of the elbow forward. I saw you kind of did that, Raven.
Oh, yeah.
How does that feel?
That feels awful.
Yeah, that looks locked for you now, Kelly.
Yeah.
Raven, it looks okay, but how does it feel?
It's not much different from how I was doing it, it was just
Yeah.
a slight shift.
Yeah,
I didn't
so,
like it at all.
right? So that's a cue I hear a lot of instructors give. I'm not quite sure where it came from. I don't know why people, I think it's because they're seeing people that maybe have a bigger bend like Margaret, they're trying to get them to straighten their arms. But giving it to the whole room, probably not helpful. That is not one of our best practices cue, right? So be mindful of that. We want a soft bend in the elbow. It's really just looking for those hyperextended elbows. Those are the ones that you want to fix. So when, I don't know that we checked this. So everybody can go into your own plank pose. So making sure our shoulders and wrists are stacked, because this is another common one that we see. So I think we are good. Margaret, your hands are a little bit wide for a plank. You're more set up for a push-up. A little slippery, sliding. Okay, now if we soften our elbows a little bit, does it make it easier or harder?
Harder than shaking.
So, that means, take a break. You're relying on your joint, even though you're not hypermobile. When you're stacking those, when you're locking your joint out, you're sitting in your joint.
It was definitely harder.
So, come out and give it another go. While you're fresh-ish. So, lock, press away, like you would normally do your plank. And now, ever so slight micro bend.
That's not bad. It was like this was a lot.
Yeah, we're not going into the top of a push-up. It's just a softening of the elbows and then release. So that's how you're gonna help people figure out whether they're hanging in their joints or not. So if they're like, oh yeah, I can hold a plank all day, this is great, blah, 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 and you say, okay, soften your elbow, and they're like, holy shit. That's when you know they've been in their joints rather than using the muscles to hold. Okay? Ba, 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 ba. All right. Side plank. Let's see a side plank. Side plank, in this case, being from the hand. One partner.
Was I supposed to answer these?
We'll come back to it in a minute. So we're looking to see, are their knees or elbows locked? Do they need to soften soften the elbow to not be in the joint.
Do we ask them to soften to see what happens?
You could. I can see they're both shaking though, so I'm gonna
Yeah,
ask them,
yeah.
I'm gonna ask them to switch sides.
Or is it-
That's cause I did soften it, and
Right.
I started shaking right away.
So, we've been using our joint to support ourselves a little bit, right?
And we don't wanna do that.
No.
Okay. Is your elbow softened?
Yep, cause it's shaking.
Alright, awesome. You're doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I lock it, I do that. That's easier.
Yeah,
Oh,
and that is
man.
bordering on hyperextended
Ha.
in fully loaded.
Yeah, that's a lot harder. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know.
All right, switch. Our bodies are very capable of taking the path of least resistance, right? In this case, it might be locking the joint.
a bit more under your shoulder.
That's what I was gonna ask, if the hand can go just a bit more under your shoulder right there.
Yeah.
There you go.
Are you locked out or?
I can tell you're
Yeah.
not, she's shaking.
You got a bit of a tremble.
Yeah, and you didn't lose
Yeah.
your integrity in the side.
Switch sides.
Yeah.
This is my bad wrist.
It's hard, eh?
See that?
Right there.
Well, this side.
There you go, that's good, your line is really good
That's
on
my
the
bad
side.
shoulder.
Right away.
Bad shoulder, you get quite a
On the,
tremble.
no, on the
Yeah.
other side was my bad.
Oh, it's bad.
This is my good one.
You're shaking, I can't.
Yeah, you're shaking, so are you
Lock
locked
it
out?
No.
That's
You're
good.
not, so that's why you're shaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
So Melissa, if somebody indicates in that position pain in the wrist, is there a modification for that? Just, okay.
Yep.
So not on the
Anything
knuckles,
is-
nothing like that?
They can. I always thought it was just me, but I cannot do a push-up or anything like that. I'm now learning that's probably because of my hypermobile fingers.
Oh, okay.
Like, I see somebody doing things on their fists and I'm like, oh my god, no. But yes, that is an option. People can go, they say fists for wrists. Whatever.
No, I think that.
Or the
I actually
shoulder
never
comes
thought
down.
of that.
Okay.
Well, yeah, if you're wearing rings, that's not gonna
Yeah.
go well, but generally the go-to is here,
Okay.
right? You will have some people that now this is going to be bothersome for the elbow, so
Yeah.
I usually offer either. If I'm gonna take them to something like a side plank, I say you can go from your hand or your elbow, pick the one that's best for you. You will have some
Yeah,
people
I
that
would
just
do that.
don't do well with side plank, period,
Okay.
and so have another option up your sleeve too. So in core fusion, usually the option is lay on your side and do leg lifts. It's not the same thing, but it's gonna keep them in the same orientation that we're in and they'll be ready to go for the next thing, so, yeah. So as a group, 4 fun cues to prevent locking or hyperextending joints in side plank and uttanasana, forward fold.
Slight bend or relaxation in the knee for forward fold and then the elbow for plank.
Yeah.
Now I got to come up with 3 more.
So this is the forward fold.
They were technically for both, right?
Yeah.
So soft bend in the knees for forward
Yeah.
fold.
What about blocks?
Yeah, could be an option for forward fold.
For the knees, so they don't hyperextend.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, they could still easily hyperextend their knees with blocks, but it could be helpful.
A block in between the legs to push again?
Maybe, because that's gonna engage, because remember what we talked about in the lecture was so it's not always bad if somebody's hypermobile. Like I said, this doesn't hurt me to be
Right.
here. But can I engage my biceps and my triceps? My triceps are actually already really engaged just by doing that because I'm going into my full range. Can I engage my bicep there? Not really. So how would we cue them to be able to do that? Squeeze your thighs. Maybe that's a cue. Engage your legs. Can you think about hugging your muscles into the bones? So, just sit with your legs extended for a moment and like fully extended as if you're completely locked out. Can you engage your quads?
Not very hardly. Doesn't-
Can you engage your hamstrings?
Yeah, but then my knee bends. Okay.
So is that bad? That's
No.
kind of what we're looking for. So I'm basically locked out, but both my hamstrings and my quads are engaged. I can still engage them in that way. If I couldn't, that's when it's a problem. So maybe those are your cues. Squeeze your thigh muscles. Get them to turn on. And some people don't have the body awareness to be able to just ask a muscle to turn on without doing something, so be aware that you will run into them and be like, what? So just be aware that that cue doesn't always work, but that might be a cue. So perhaps squeezing a block would help get you there. Yeah.
Pushing into a band, will that also elicit, like, will that help, or?
Possibly. It won't necessarily take them out of hyperextension, but it will ensure that there's some activation around the muscle. Yeah. So I think those are fairly decent. What about for plank pose then? What if we put a mini loop around our arms and ask them to push out into the mini loop? Right? Or a yoga strap. Put a yoga strap against the arms, same thing. So what did you learn about connective tissue today? Any aha moments or anything that's still fuzzy?
How much more in-depth fascia is? I think I had only envisioned it, I've heard like a sheathing over muscles. I
Mhm.
didn't envision it as attaching
Yeah,
right
one
to the
thing.
bone
Yeah,
and then
okay.
creating compartments around muscle
Yeah.
fascia. Like I didn't see that, so
Right.
it's a whole lot of fascia.
I didn't really know the IP band was fascia.
Or the
Deep fascia.
adipose tissue is fascia, isn't it?
Right?
That's good.
Yes, it is good.
Got
It is
great
good.
fascia.
Lots of layers of fascia, absolutely. Anything else that you're curious about to do with fascia at the moment?
What do you think about, was it myofascial release?
Mhm.
No, or it's, I don't know if you even have the right thing, but that was a big thing. It was suggested to me that I need to do that.
To
Yes,
lower it.
do that.
Yeah, do that.
Yes, do
roll.
that. That
I'll
was
see
actually the
yeah.
course I just took, was all about that. So the role model method of myofascial release, essentially. Myo meaning muscle, fascial, myofascial. So you're releasing, because the fascia is interwoven throughout your muscles. So yes, it is very helpful and should be done by everyone. Yeah.
Not just me,
Not just you,
because I'm
everybody.
tight,
It is amazing because that fascia is so interwoven and connected. You might have, so think about if you have a snag in your sweater and you pick at said snag. It doesn't affect just where the snag is, it might pull the shoulder. So if you have a snag in your fascia deep within your belly, around your kidneys or whatever, you might be having a pain in your shoulder. Those are connected because they're pulling on one another. So we don't think about those connections. I liken it to the knee bones connected to the, right? Everything is connected, and just because you have a pain in your ankle doesn't mean that pain is being caused from the ankle. It could be fascia in the bottom of your foot, it could be fascia up in your thigh, or even all the way up in your opposite shoulder that is pulling on those fascial lines. We have several different fascial lines throughout the body, which is really interesting if you ever want to study those. And then you can follow the fascial line. So if somebody comes to me and says, I've got a pain in this shoulder, I'm like, okay, so we've got a spiral fascial line. That could be connected to the opposite hip. So let's start there and see what we can release over there and see if it helps. Right? Because it's all connected.
Yeah, my sister-in-law's, well, she's a little trouble, she's a massage therapist, and often I've gone to her, and I was having trouble, like, I think I felt like the top of my shoulder or whatever, but it was actually scar tissue under my shoulder blade.
Yeah.
And she had to
Rotator
break
cuff
it.
likely.
and it was painful getting it released, but I've never had trouble with it since she did it.
Right,
And that was years ago now.
yeah,
So it was quite different from where I was feeling it.
yes.
That wasn't the origin of the problem.
Right, yeah, so fascia very, very connected, and so if we're tight anywhere in our fascial system, or if we're dehydrated, because fascia is a lot of water, that also will affect it. So yeah, very interesting stuff.
One last
Yeah.
question. For the side plank, as a modification if there's issue with hyperextension, coming off the foot and going to the knee, is that helpful?
Absolutely, so if they're hyperextending their bottom leg, if both legs are straight, I rarely teach side plank with both legs extended.
Yeah.
Most people don't do good form there, some do, I offer it as an option for people to go to, but as the instructor, I almost never go to it. But yeah, bending the knees if they're hyperextending, and if they're hyperextending through the elbow, being on the elbow instead of up on the hand. Alright. Moving on to class structure. Are we all comfortable here, or do we wanna go back to the chairs?
I didn't get all the keys here.
Oh, for
I'm missing some.
So what did we come up with cues for helping with hyperextension?
forward fold?
For side plank, I got soften elbows, bending the knee, being on elbow instead of hand.
And being on the knee instead of up on both legs.
Yep, so that'd be another one for side plank, so if they're hyperextending the leg, they can go to the knees.
Being on the okay.
You could just said the one
And
that you
then-
mentioned, just flat on, you're just on the side doing leg lifts. if
We
it's
say
really
that.
unavailable.
So, but I think Raven's missing the ones for forward fold, so what did we have for forward fold?
I just have soften knees
Use blocks to
or use blocks.
You can have blocks under the hands if they're hyperextending because they're trying to go too deep, that could help. Blocks are hit and miss on that one. I think Stacy also recommended trying a block between the thighs to help them engage those muscles. And in general, asking them to engage their thigh muscles, with or without a block. Can you engage your muscles? If they can, even if they're hyperextended, they're not in any danger. If they cannot engage the muscles, that's when we need to get them to soften the knees. I'm staying over here, I need my coffee. So, moving on to sequencing, class structure. I believe this is page 85 in your book if you're following along. But, not yet, sorry. It's on 85, so remember that, but I don't want you to look at page 85 yet. Because we're gonna talk about it first and some of that information is already on the page, so I don't want you to read ahead. Yeah, so just flip it down if you found it already. So if we're going to create a sequence, not follow a sequence, we talked I think on day one about there are some styles that are set sequences like TRX Yoga Flow, Ashtanga Yoga, etc. Those are set sequences that you don't have to, you just have to memorize the sequence. Most of us teach our own sequence where we're designing our own plan. So if we're going to design our own plan, what are some considerations that we may want to think about as teachers and why?
Well, it's simple to movements first before complex.
Starting with simpler movements before complex, okay?
To warm up the muscles, right?
We want to warm up first, yeah?
If you have a primary pose or a key pose that you're working towards, what other poses will support?
Yeah, absolutely.
We talked this morning maybe about starting with a little bit of meditation, if that helps get people into the
Could be.
groove.
Yeah. What about time of day? Is a class that's at 6 a.m. going to look the same as a class that's at 7 p.m.?
No.
Probably not, right? It might look similar, but probably not. The class style. My flow class looks a whole lot different than my yin class. So when we're sequencing, we still have to think about what style it is. My flow looks a whole lot different than my hatha class. I have the same plan in my head, here's the peak pose we're going to go to, but how are we gonna get there? It's gonna be very different in hatha than it is in flow. And there are certain peak poses I'll do in flow that I won't even try to do in hatha based on the people that are in the class. So that will change what it looks like. May even be the time of year. In the winter, we might need a little bit of a longer warm-up, right? Our energy might be a little lower, especially because it gets dark so early, etc. So that might affect what we're doing. Did you have another one, Stacey? You look like you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just thinking, all of a sudden a couple people came in and said, hey, you did this or I did this, or all of a sudden you have an idea what you want to do and you're like, oh, that might not work.
Yeah, absolutely. The level of the student, right? So if you know you're planning a beginner's class versus an intermediate or advanced class, or if you know you're going to have all levels in the room, your plan is going to be different. Available props. If you don't have blocks available to you, you can't plan something that's going to need blocks. Same with straps or bolsters or what have you, right? So bearing that in mind, that I used to teach restorative before COVID. I don't teach it anymore because in COVID, we couldn't use any of the props. You couldn't wash them properly. So we've come back to the blankets for yin because those can be washed, but I still have bolsters in the studio or in the house that I don't use because they're really hard to wash. So you could ask people to bring their own. Even for yin, I ask people to bring their own. I have some here in case people forget, but that's a consideration. What props do you have available? The size of the studio and how full your class is. So there are some classes that I would like to do things on the wall, but I got too many bodies in here. I don't have that much wall space. So then I have to change the plan. Maybe when I planned the class, I only had 4 people or 5 people register for the class, and then 2 days before, all of a sudden everybody decided that they wanted yin that night. I had that happen once and I was like, shit, I planned at the wall. Okay, I need to change some of the poses I'm doing because we were gonna do like a wide leg at the wall with 4 people. There's lots of space to do that. With 9 people, actually I had 10 that night, I was like, oh, so we did a butterfly at the wall instead. Right? Similar pose, but I had to change it on the fly because all of a sudden I had extra people registered very last minute for whatever reason that day. It's not usually a popular class, but there we were. The length of class. So here, our classes are pretty much always an hour, but other places will offer like a lunchtime express yoga class, so you only got 30 minutes. So that's gonna look a little different. When I was doing Ian Nidra, it was an hour and a half class, so I had a lot more time to work with, right? So the length of class will make a difference. You can also consider holidays or different themes or events. So I've run like gratitude yoga around Thanksgiving and stuff like that. So you can theme classes. So that would change your plan as well. Okay? So those are some of the things that you want to think about. What is peak pose sequencing? Stacey kind of touched on this already.
Well, you're using warm-ups and pre-poses that aren't as tough to warm up your body or get your muscles woken up, that's where you're heading to this peak pose.
Right. So if you have a pose in mind that you want to be the apex of your class, essentially, you have to think about what does the body need to be able to do to be successful at that pose. So you're planning the rest of your class to help them get to that peak pose. So in the classes we've done so far, they've all been neutral standing, but our peak pose yesterday, as an example, was Warrior 3. So we needed to make sure we were opening the hamstring. So we had pyramid pose. We also needed hip flexors open to be able to get the leg up on the wall. So we did a low lunge. So we were thinking about the peak pose with all of the poses that came before to make that peak pose a little more accessible. We also did standing splits, which was very similar to at the wall. We were just lifting the leg higher. So it was preparing your body for what was to come, even though you didn't necessarily pick up on that or notice that, right?
Do you have to have a peak pose in a yoga class?
No. So where we are going from here is peak pose.
Okay.
That is what we are going to be working on. All of the classes we've done so far have had a peak pose. I will say my style tends to be more well-rounded class. And I tend to do a little bit of everything. And that's okay too, but you still wanna have a general idea of what is the purpose of your class. Are you focusing on hips? Are you focusing on shoulders, etc.? So we're gonna be learning peak pose sequencing. And then if you choose to teach that way or not, that's okay, but have a reason for why you're teaching what you're teaching. Make sense? Peak pose sequencing uses component parts. So a component part is what needs to be educated or prepared, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, to do that pose. So if we need to educate the core to do crow, we might do some cat-cow pulling the knee into the nose, like little crunches. We might do on the back crunches like this, because this is essentially crow, right? So preparing your body for what's coming. So a component part for crow would be wrists. Oh, we might do some warm-up for the wrists when we're on hands and knees, rocking forward and back, side to side, twisting the hands, flicky, flicky, right? Those are component parts. What does my body need to be able to do to be successful at said peak pose? Peak pose doesn't have to be really complex. Warrior 3, not really that complex. But our body still needs to be prepared for it. There's a lot going on with it, but it's not an unattainable pose. Crow pose might be unattainable for a lot of bodies, right? So that is a much more complex pose. So let's say we're going to divide our class into 4 sections. What would the 4 sections be? So let's start with the beginning of the class.
Meditation.
Could be. Warm-up. Yeah. So what could we call all of that together? Intro, maybe.
Preparation.
Preparation. Or arrival. We're arriving onto our mats. What do we need to do to get ready to go from here? Right? Because arrival starts from the minute they walk in the door. Right? Yes, it's the first part of the class as well. But that might be, sorry? Greeting, setup, how do you want their mats? What props do they need to have available, etc. Yes. It will also include potentially a little bit of meditation and warm-up. Somebody said each one had, yeah. I was like, that came from this corner, but I'm not sure where. So we'll call the first section arrival. After arrival, so think after a little bit of maybe breathing, meditation, and a little bit of warm-up movement, where are we getting to from there?
Bring up the heat.
Bring up the heat. Yeah, which is kind of bordering on warm-up, so we're kind of crossing sections here.
Well, I kind of think warm-up is just, like, you're laying on the mat, you bring your knees in, but warm-up is sun salutations, like you're starting to get that heat to go up, you know. in the body.
So, sun salutations are technically part of the warm-up. Some classes will start with sun salutation. Some will. I'm not a fan of it. My body's not ready to jump right into sun salutations without a little bit of movement first, but some people do. So that could still be part of our arrival in warm-up. But directly after sun salutations, what do we usually do? You've all done a class with me.
Balance.
Not usually directly after. Sometimes, but rarely.
Standing poses.
Standing poses. Usually some standing poses in there. Sometimes it'll take it down to the mat. So we can call that activation. Those are those poses that are starting to prepare our body to go into the peak pose. Okay? So arrival and activation. You can probably flip to 85 at this point because there's probably a place to write this down. Unless it's already written down. It might be. Ah, there you go. So you can see what the next 2 sections are. It's peak. Peak. Peak is next. So we arrive, we begin to warm our body up in that arrival, and we move into activation. And I would say you can argue, is sun salutation part of arrival or part of activation? It depends on the class. Okay? But activation is getting into those poses that are going to prepare your body for the peak pose, which is the next section. And then we finish with integration. Okay? So, I'm going to ask Stacy and Kelly to work together, and Margaret and Raven to work together. And you are each going to, you're just going to take 5 minutes, and you're gonna answer these questions. And I'm not sure if this is in your manual. So Stacy and Kelly, you're going to look at arrival and activation. And Margaret and Raven, you're gonna look at peak and integration. What is the purpose of this part of the class? What kinds of poses would this part of the class include? What kind of tone or feeling would this part of the class have? And what do you need to think about when teaching this part of the class? Are those notes listed in your book?
Not what is the purpose. It says tone of this part of the class, and then the other side it says types of poses included.
Okay. So also think about the purpose when you're thinking about it. So you don't have to write these directly into your manual yet if you want to kind of talk it out, but maybe on a separate sheet of paper with your partner, talk about what is the purpose of that section. What kind of poses might be included in that section? What kind of tone or feeling would you have? And what do you need to think about when teaching that part of the class? And just like 5 minutes, you don't have a lot of time.
Okay.
So rivals agree.
So the tone will be welcoming, I guess. Yeah. Informing,
Like so for
saying,
each type of poses,
you
you
know,
feel
what
like
the
equal
focus of
pose,
the class is going to be, so that
triangle
the
pose.
props are ready and the
Right.
mats are
So,
spaced.
okay,
and
props.
Those are the,
Does that make sense?
yeah.
Probably use
Asking
Even
if they could hear you.
43, I think she's saying is a peak, even if it's not.
maybe a small one.
So how do you figure out the difference between all
They're
three warriors?
focused
and
on
so
the
like-
So the Warriors is the one with the leg up in the back. So
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so it's.
And notice that your manual has,
So
like,
that they actually
this
really want to
includes,
hear.
right? So it's talking about what's
cat
already
cow,
there. So when you
sense
look at that,
orientation.
what tone would that part of the class have? Like, would it be really amped up or would it be really relaxed, right? That's kind of what we're looking for.
Oh, okay, so the tone would be amped up, I guess, 'cause it would be.
Opening up,
So I guess maybe
and meditation.
Energetic.
Introduces the theme of the class.
So like super short.
So I guess bringing them.
Arrival into the breath, so we've got that meditation, breathing, and then warm up.
Also,
start
we've
with
already got the
positions
types of
in your
poses
body,
also included, I guess that's what.
Yeah.
Ego,
So
triangle,
what
warriors,
kind
and I
of
put pyramids
poses, so
here.
probably laying on your back first,
Mm-hmm.
or sitting up, sitting.
And I guess
Sitting
if you were
would be
getting
good
more
'cause
complicated.
I know
that
it's just for me, if I only have
would
my
include things like
best.
throwing off.
I start to get like,
Yeah.
oh, this is great.
Yeah, I guess we usually do it
We
half.
usually do that.
These were
So
small.
everything else, so
Okay.
what we also have to do.
Is that
Would start
purpose.
when you're sitting or lying down.
So.
So I started differentiating
first
between
piece
the
of
two
the
because I had people going,
activation
I do both
is-
and I can't tell the difference between them. I'm like,
What's sitting on now?
Oh, I can.
between hatha and flow.
Oh,
So I was like, okay, I need to make these
Yeah,
a little bit more
sure,
different.
yeah.
So I usually start flow seated
So you
because
still have to
people
do
are
what
usually
the
more ready to get
purpose
going.
is.
I usually start hatha on the back because a lot of people that come to hatha require a little bit more warm up to get going. Not everybody, but a lot of people do.
Tone of this class.
So then you start to bring movement back,
More
your
relaxing.
attention back to the
I guess we
music.
still have to do purpose and stuff for the
this
feet.
isn't spine.
Yeah.
Just a couple more minutes, so if you're still on your first one, move into your next
Yeah.
one.
So tone of this class is more
To get moving.
Cool down.
relaxed, yeah, cool down.
Yeah,
Let's get the spine moving.
and then some stuff.
Yeah.
And then
Releasing
activation,
energy.
Get
Yeah.
going.
we would need,
So for developing.
depending on what our peak pose was,
Yeah.
we
So
would use poses that
what
would
would be
Open the.
the poses that
educate
that
the
you
muscles
coming out of
Yeah.
something like worry or through.
So wrists, if they're gonna be bearing weight.
Core.
Core aren't for everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, like, would that be Tadasana, or is that a little too basic?
Well, I guess that's
That
that.
or open the shoulder girdle.
The
Or
end.
the hips.
Hips.
So when you're cool down before that,
Activation,
what should you do?
working them through.
Like
Activating the feet and their arches.
Cobra could be,
So
or
they've got good balance.
figure four.
And maybe for activating your maybe into some a bit of balancing poses, structured balance poses.
Yeah, so like core would be balancing.
Yeah. So tree
So
or
kind of
I'm thinking like,
lunge
just based on
poses,
like classes
anything
I've
that's
done,
slightly
like twisting
asymmetrical,
poses.
because peak poses tend to be more
Yeah.
complicated.
Shoulders, taking
I'm not sure about that.
hips.
I'm not sure if that could be more advanced, that one of peak group.
Wrists, if you
I don't know.
The classes I take,
Yeah.
they usually have them at the very
She
end.
always gets us.
But we
Yeah.
would do that with.
Oh, yeah,
sunny
like you do
sounds.
this kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, or even
Yeah.
the one where you let your knees fall to one side.
Yes,
I don't know, that's
yeah,
what
those,
it is.
yeah, those kinds of
Yeah.
stuff.
Okay, I recognize that we're probably not quite done, but we're going to chat about it anyhow. So, you guys got to use your books. This was the part you were actually not supposed to use your books for. I went, oh well. It's all good. The books are helpful for this.
I didn't even see that till you guys said.
Yeah.
I wasn't looking at it, I was writing it down, I'm like, oh yeah, I got that one.
So, arrival. So it says right in your book, arrival includes pre-class contact with the teacher and the space to transition to practice, opening pranayama, meditation or grounding, introduction of class theme if you have one, arrival into the breath, incorporation of ujjayi if it's appropriate to the style, ujjayi breath being our ocean's breath.
I know what.
You know that one, that's a TRX thing. Usually that's more of a flow style thing. Transition to body sensation, beginning of movement, general warm-up including cat-cow, sun salutations, and accessible postures. Okay? So what kind of tone do we feel like we should have as part of this? So Margaret and Raven were working on this.
We didn't keep it in.
Nope, you guys worked on this. Okay, sorry. Sorry guys. What tone do we think we should have?
Welcoming,
Yeah,
greet everybody and have music playing in the background so we get them into that, mode that we're going to be moving
Yep.
to the music.
Instructionally, maybe a slightly slower pace because you're getting things to open, you're getting them ready to receive or to move into something. What's the tone?
so think about easing into practice. I think that kind of falls into that. Might also include student introductions. So a once around the room, or as people are coming in, if you have new students, having a one-on-one with them, any injuries I need to be aware of, that sort of thing, depending on where you're teaching, that may or may not be appropriate. Definitely meeting any new students though, whether you get into if they have anything you need to worry about or not. So here I always screen people ahead of time. So if I know that there's an issue, I will tell the instructor ahead of time, unless they don't fill out their form. And then I usually try to come out and be available to get them to fill out their form, and then I will have a conversation with them if needed. But if it's somebody that you're not familiar with, you can always just say, hey, how are you? Good to meet you, blah, blah, blah. Any areas that you're taking care of today? Right? And then just so that you know if there's something, like if they come into TRX Yoga Flow and tell you that they've got a shit shoulder, you're gonna be like, oh, this might not be a good class for you. So hopefully I vetted them ahead of time and said that's probably not a good choice because there's a lot of this going on in that class, right? Which may or may not be appropriate for them. How you greet your students is going to be dependent on where you're teaching. My expectation here is essentially they come through the door and you're saying hello with their name. If they're a new student, you might not know who they are, but we have a roster, right, Raven? So you can kind of process of elimination sometimes go, it's not that far, so it must be this one. Okay, right? And if you're not sure, it's okay to say, hey, I'm Melissa. I haven't met you before.
Well, I have registered it.
So, introduce yourself, right? So I saw you do that yesterday with Ken because you knew Colin.
Yeah.
He was the only other guy on the roster.
Yeah.
You must be Ken. Hi, I'm Raven. Perfect. Exactly, right? Process of elimination. It was pretty easy to figure out which one Ken was. What kinds of families of poses should be included?
Well, depending on what, the peak poses you're working towards, so if you're, doing poses in, the warm-up, you want to be aware of what the peak pose is.
So I'm
It could
gonna
be-
pause you there. That's more of an activation thing.
Oh,
So think about that in your activation. So for the arrival, we're thinking about meditation type poses.
oh, yeah, okay, well, I'm sorry, I jumped over to the next section. So-
Yeah, that's okay.
So lying or sitting and
Yeah.
meditation,
Mhm.
after meditation, start moving, we've got, moving into sun salutations.
Yeah.
Child
Yeah.
pose.
So you might have some reclined poses if they're starting on their back, or you might have some gentle movement seated, sideways, stuff like that, just starting to get moving. Cat, cow, moving into sun salutations, etc. And some accessible standing poses. That's kind of all in arrival. So now jumping into activation. In your book it says, incorporation of accessible postures beginning to move into complexity, maintenance and development of heat energy awareness, instruction of component parts, specific warm-up, teaching towards the actions and openings needed for peak pose, maintenance of breath awareness, and incorporation of theme if it's relevant to the style. So, what kind of tone should this part of the class have?
A little bit more energetic
Yep.
and, a certain more active than arrival.
Definitely. So, more active, more energizing. Depending on the class style, your pace might also increase. So we started nice and slow to ease them in, but depending on the class style, if it's yin, you're not gonna increase your pace. But if it's flow, your pace is gonna pick up significantly from what you started with. This holding space thing again. Teacher, hold space for rising intensity. What might that mean here? It might be observing your class and seeing, is the flow more challenging than you thought? Do I need to give them more child's pose or down dog breaks? Can I recommend that they add in an extra flow because they're looking like it's kind of easy today, right? So that might be the holding space for intensity. Observe your class, see what they need. And how could you offer a little bit of both?
Well, you can offer options, like, if this is enough, stay here today. If you'd like a little more, try this.
Yeah. So when I do flow, often I will say, step back to down dog. You can hold here.
Or,
You can rest in child's pose, or if you feel you need it, add in another flow, right? And so then they got 3 options right there to make it more appropriate for their body, okay? So we've got the tone. What kind of poses may be included here?
So if you're starting to activate, do things that are going to utilize the feet for stability, working ground up, get the pelvis involved, so that's a way for shoulder, middle, wrist, things like that. Maybe standing poses at this point, very gentle balancing.
Yep. I think it very much depends on what your peak pose is.
yeah.
That's gonna
that was
inform what needs to be in the activation for sure. Most likely, you've got standing poses, probably some active hip openers, maybe some accessible hand balancing even, maybe. Accessible back bends. Plank is technically a hand balance, just so we know. All right,
What's
peak,
the third one? You said accessible hand balance and accessible
back bends.
back bends.
Our peak includes incorporation of increasingly complex poses such as active hip openers, arm balances, heating inversions, and back bends as appropriate to the style. Clear instruction of component parts, building towards the peak, stages of the peak poses, and instruction of the peak, demonstration if desired, and key teaching of theme if relevant to style. So what should the tone of this part of the class be?
You're on?
Oh, for peak?
Yeah.
Okay, so we had amped up, energetic, and super focused.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's really it. It's the strongest part of the class. So this is where you're really holding space for intensity, right? So what do they need? Can I push them a little bit more, or do I need to back off my teaching because they're like dying, right? It never fails. I will plan a class that I think is going to be, I'm going to give them a little bit of a break. And then somebody at the end of the class goes, oh my God, that was so hard. That was like the hardest class we've done in a while. And I'm like, really? And vice versa, I planned one that I was like, okay, this is really gonna get them going, and then afterwards, oh, you were so nice to us today. What I think is going to be hard or easy is clearly not what they think is hard or easy, right? So that's where the observation has to come in. Okay, do I need to find a way to push them a little bit more, or do I need to pull it back a little bit more? And probably there's going to be a bit of both. So how do I give them options to find the right level for them? So what kinds of family of poses may be included in peak?
So we got eagle pose, triangle pose, warrior 3, pyramid pose, and crow.
Yeah.
We were kind of assuming that warrior 1 and 2 were more like the activation poses, is that right?
Yeah, it is. So think more in pose families rather than specific poses. So challenging standing poses, right? So think about what would be challenged, right? Warrior 1, warrior 2, not really challenging. So the other ones you mentioned, sure. Deeper back bends, inversions, and hand balancings. Those are kind of what we're looking at as peak poses. So integration includes transition poses out of peak, counter poses to the peak. So if we did a big back bend, we might want to have a lot of forward folds. Settling of energy, cooling inversions, seated and reclined postures, seated pranayama or meditation, shavasana, transition from practice into daily life, and conclusion of theme if you used one. So what kind of tone should we have in the integration?
More relaxed.
Yeah.
Slow it down and do the music or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah. Cooling off, winding down, and calming. And what kinds of families of poses might be included?
Well, Reagan said twisting poses, and at first I thought, well, those are hard, can be harder poses, but, you know, just the ones where you're like this, or, you know, so, yeah.
Well, your muscles are really warm, so you can give them modifications on twisting, but you can still do the twisting at the end, because everything is warmed up, you've gotten to your peak, so you can really do it then.
Yeah, so again, not thinking necessarily about specific poses, but thinking more so about pose families. So usually integration is our seated poses and our supine poses, or reclined poses, shavasana, and maybe meditation poses. So yes, twisting can definitely be in there. Seated or lying down would be part of integration. So, what is a complex pose?
It has different component parts to it.
Yes, lots of things going on in the pose. So a complex pose and a hard pose are different. Plank is hard, but it's not complex, right? What is a peak pose?
Complex.
It's also a complex pose usually. It's whatever you are working towards in your class, okay? And so what are the component parts?
Like building and turning on and educating muscles that you're going to use for your peak pose.
Yes. Breaking down that peak pose into its component parts. We're gonna get lots of practice with that. All right. Any questions on the 4 components of the class?
I missed one of them when you said for peak type of poses, you said challenging standing poses, deeper back bends, inversions, and there was one more.
Hand balancing.
Hand balancing.
Yeah. All right. What time we got here? 1:20. So we are going to be moving into our practice.